Hello, friends. Welcome back to Trending. Today is Thursday, March 20th. It's about 9:30 as we're recording. Good morning, Joe.
How's it going?
Doing good. How are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm glad the weather is better today.
Yes.
It threw a tantrum yesterday.
Dude, it's been a weird couple days. And
I was in a bad mood yesterday. I'm going to go ahead and confess to you.
for it to be, 78 or whatever on Tuesday, and then literally snow during spring break, I mean, you just never know.
I know, man.
It's crazy.
But I'm glad it's looking up.
Yes.
So I had a brighter disposition about today.
Yes, good.
Yes.
Maybe partially because today's basketball day.
That's right.
You ready for the tournament?
It's time to hoop that holler. Cue Sweet Georgia Brown.
I've told you, I think I've said here last week that I haven't really been paying attention to basketball really at all. So I think I'm going in pretty blind. I have no idea what the next few weeks are going to look like, but it's a fun time of year.
It is. The least productive day of the year, today and tomorrow. We have games locally in Wichita.
Yeah.
Today and Saturday. We've got some friends going to a few of those.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
It's cool to have Wichita hosting. Yeah.
It's a good development, man.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Okay, should we dive in? You ready?
Let's do it.
Today's another one of those days where we're taking a kind of a faith topic. We have at least a little bit of a news, current event thing that we can tie in, but we're kind of continuing this series as we're doing kind of some deep dives into some of our faith stuff that we've been talking about the last few weeks. So as we've done this little series, we haven't talked about work and rest and Sabbath and that whole thing, and that's another thing that's a big part of Christianity that we haven't really, I think we've mentioned on Trending before. I'm sure it's come up through different topics, but we haven't really done like a deep dive on it, so I thought today could be the day for that.
Let's
so
do it.
The news story that's in the news is South Korea, of all places, is they're testing out the idea of doing like a nationwide 4-day work week.
Okay.
Which this comes up every once in a while. There's a couple of different countries. I think Iceland, there's a couple of different countries who have experimented with some various ways of doing this to try to see if that's possible or realistic for at least some industries to move toward a 4-day work week. The South Korea angle is interesting because the reason why they're doing it is they have the lowest fertility rate in the world.
That was when I saw that article. I'm like, what an interesting connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're literally just not, they don't have enough people.
Wow.
And so they're like, what can we do to repopulate our country? And they're like, well, it looks like people are working too much.
Give mom and dad some more time together.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's kind of crazy, but it makes it, I guess, I'm not super familiar with the South Korean work culture, but apparently it's been pretty heavy, that long hours, and I don't know much about the conditions or whatever, but they're like, well, maybe this is something we can try to see if this kind of can move the ship toward kind of a healthier family atmosphere throughout the country. So that's interesting.
Yes.
So, I guess, there's a lot of things we could talk about here, but and the Bible's pretty clear that I think we're kind of tempted to see work as a bad thing. Like, I think that's maybe part of some of the Christian underlying kind of guilt stuff that we end up with, is that work is bad. We're supposed to rest and be kind of at peace with God, but that's true. But I think the Bible's also pretty clear that work is a good and noble thing. We're instructed to work, and we're supposed to actually work hard. We're not supposed to just work, but we're supposed to work hard.
Yeah.
But obviously, rest and trusting God and not putting too much value on ourselves and our own work ethic is also kind of a biblical thing. So I think this is a topic that most people wrestle with. Like, how much do we work? How much balance and margin should we have in our lives? Is it really realistic for us to take a whole day of rest? Is that even possible in 2025? Yeah. So where should we start, Joe? What's the first thing that pops in your head?
So I think you're right. So I think that the negative view of work is simply kind of more of a theological trope. Like, we shouldn't work. We can't work toward our salvation. It's all in grace. And it's just worth noting, like, most Protestants, when the Protestant move was in the come up and nation states began to take a Protestant flag or whatever, they also had, they also engendered a strong work ethic. Calvin famously has talked about how important not just work, but like hard work, how feeling exhausted at the end of the day is a praiseworthy thing, because all you're left with is the only energy you have is to rest and to delight, right? And so I think, and most of these people were farmers, and we know farming is hard work. Yeah. And I think it's because a lot of our culture is still kind of based on agrarian rhythms. The work week, church being on Sunday morning, because that was probably best for farmers to all gather together for public worship, right? Yeah. And so I just think with the advent of technology, leveraging different workspace environments, working from home, I think there's a fresh conversation of not just adults working, but maybe even youth in their school rhythms undergoing a change. Some are just not wired to get up early in the morning and be productive. Like they need, sure, well, let the sun come up for a while and then I'll follow it, a few hours. And so is there a chance that night work or even night school could be best even for kids? And so I think that there's a fresh conversation happening. I think it's because we've woken up and realized, man, the majority of the world is not agrarian. And so how can we do things differently? But then the topic of rest comes in. This is an ancient Christian practice. In fact, it's one of the big 7 that they've done from the beginning, something that they absorbed from the Jewish life that that Christianity sprang from. And so there's always been great teaching on Sabbath keeping.
Yeah.
However, we struggle with it. And I think it's because with rising costs, we wonder, can we keep up if we truly pause?
Yeah.
And I think one of my favorite resources on Sabbath comes from Walt Brueggemann. He's an Old Testament scholar. He called Sabbath a resistance. So it was a form of resistance for the people of Israel. If we can recall, when they were in slavery in Egypt, they were made to work every single day from sun up to sundown. Yeah. When Moses came along, he made it worse. They had to go find their own straw, and the brick quotient was still, the same or even more. Yeah. And so when they were freed from the tyranny of Egypt, one of the first things that God tried to tell them to do is to rest. Yeah. A whole day. It was a conversion practice. Yeah. You need to go from this frame of mind that you were so used to this frame of mind, because we have to be different than Egypt. Yeah. I think that's one of the big plots of the Old Testament that we don't catch sometimes, is that one of the fears of the theological minds of the Old Testament is it was easier to get Israel out of Egypt than it is to get Egypt out of Israel, meaning what's preventing us from becoming this oppressive culture and empire like Egypt? Yeah. And that's the sad story of Solomon and his reign. Yeah. Is that here he is. He's a guy blessed by God at an early age, but the wheels fell off, and he turned Israel into Egypt 2.0. Yeah. And therefore, there's like this great devastation in the land. So that was a side point, but I think the reason why it's hard for us to imagine being Sabbath-keeping people is because it's a resistance. We'll have to resist urges deep inside in order to be people who are content to rest, whatever that rest looks like. We can get into the finer details of that. But I think the big idea is, do we trust God enough that we don't have to be productive for a day and everything will still be covered and our needs will be met? So there's some urges inside that are going to tell us no, no, no. Yeah. And so Bruggemann's just like the ancient people of Israel, we need to learn to be rebels toward that urge. We need to learn to resist in order to be people of rest in the wake of all that resistance. So. Yeah,
and that's good. I like the Israel and Egypt tie in there. That's good. Yeah, I think if people have been around church for a while, they kind of know the basics. Where in the Old Testament, there's all these rules about how many steps you can take, and you can't save an ox you can save an ox, but you can't save an ox, and there's all these things, right? So I think a lot of people, if they've been around church, they know kind of the Old Testament thing. They know that we're supposed to honor and keep the Sabbath, but then Jesus comes around and complicates it by saying Sabbath was made for man wasn't made for the Sabbath. So that, I think a lot of people are kind of familiar with that overall framework. Like, work on the Sabbath was bad, but then it's a command, don't work on the Sabbath, but then Jesus kind of twists it like Jesus always did. Yes. So I think that's part of why we're confused. There's Old Testament says this, but Jesus seems to say we can actually do whatever feeds us, whatever that ends up looking like, and that's why it gets kind of murky. So how does Jesus's Sabbath was made for man, not for Sabbath? How does that change maybe the way of things?
I think, Jesus gave a good correction there, because it seemed like, he was helping people on the Sabbath, which I think that the armchair Israelite would be like, this is a good thing. I mean, this person was ill for years. Right. They had ailment for years. This is a good thing. It was like the boundary keeping, boundary watching leaders of Israel that were trying to blow the whistle on him. Yeah. And so Jesus just saw this, this is one of those things where a good thing turned into a destructive thing. And he wanted to remind them that there wasn't the first thing on God's mind when he had this creation project wasn't 24 hours where nobody would work. That wasn't the ultimate aim. The ultimate aim was, no, he's going to make image-bearing creatures that would share in the care of creation with him. Yeah. And how can we do that better is that God then gave this command for us to rest, because if we work from exhaustion, we're not going to be very good at it, right? And so Jesus saw how Sabbath was primary and human beings were secondary. It's like he was just like acknowledging y'all view of humanity is battered here, and we need to reverse it. And once again, remind ourselves that Sabbath was employed by God to help us in our creation care and just being the image of God. And so I think that more than anything else, he just tried to give a better context to it and stuff. I think that all of us would agree that if we could have rest and it's really like the true definition of Sabbath is ceasing. It's not resting because I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
I've spent all my energy, so now I'm doing the rest thing. No, it's like, no, deciding with volition and our autonomy, for X amount of hours on this day, like I'm going to choose not to do anything.
Yeah.
As a faith proclamation that God will still care for me in the midst of it. And I love the way that like the Bema folks, because how the day in the ancient Judaism it was evening, it was morning.
Yeah.
So what do you do in the evening? You sleep. Yeah. And I just love how Marty Solomon said, this is a radical idea that the first thing that we do in the day is sleep.
Right.
And everything's going to be fine. So I just think it's more of, can we build in rest? Not work so hard that rest has to find us, but can we find rest for ourselves with more than enough gas in the tank, and do it as a way to delight in the people in our life and delight in the creation and some hobbies that we might have along the way. Like, can we do those things? Because that'll make us just a more healthy human being. Yeah. So that we go back into our vocation and calling, that we're actually leading from rest, leading from strength instead of leading from weakness because we just didn't get enough rest after that period of exhaustion, then rest. Yeah. And so I think I just love the way Abraham Joshua Heschel says this is what Sabbath looks like. He had a great book on it. Okay. He says if you work with your hands, if your primary occupation is using your hands, then you need a Sabbath with your mind. Yeah. And if your primary work is with your mind, you need to Sabbath with your hands. He's like, there needs to be like a second self, that like your Sabbath self. Yeah. And it needs to look way different than your work self in order to employ the goodness of all this. Yeah. And I think that's probably been my biggest struggle is because I can be at home in my sweatpants around my family, but I'm still sneaking the laptop over and doing a little bit of emailing, doing a little bit of writing, just to get ahead on the stuff. Oh yeah. For guilty. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so I think that's the challenge is, can we make a boundary? Say, no, like work Joe is gonna, power him down, unplug him, and then like Sabbath Joe is gonna be plugged in, right? Yeah. And so just along the way, I haven't done a deep dive on this, but there are some neat things that people who do this more regularly that they employ. Like for instance, I think modern Jews, they start the Sabbath with like a tasty treat. I think ancient Jews, they would take a bite of honey and they give it to their kids as to it was like an alarm bell. Like, this is when the Sabbath begins, when you get something really sugary and sweet to eat. Yeah. And so like modern people, they have donuts, on the beginning of their Sabbath day, Yeah. It's like something that's distinct. Like, we only have this breakfast on this day because this day is different. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so if we can like somehow start our Sabbath season with something unique and then end it within a celebration and say, okay, from here, it's fine for us to get back into work mode. Yeah. Something that we can kind of mark the beginning and the end of our rest season. Yeah. I think that would be so helpful because work will encroach and it'll find its way in, and we'll get that rest that we really need and you probably should employ so that we can have a healthy soul inside.
No, that's really good, man. That's very helpful. You mentioned earlier the idea of like what actually is rest. What does that look like for different people? Because if I'm probably not the only one who feels this way, but if I'm honest, being at home, like being a good dad, it's hard work. Yeah. Like, you would think that being at home with your kids is maybe rest, right? But for me, being an active, engaged dad is harder work than my job. Yeah. And I'm weird that when I'm resting, one of the things I like to do is run. Like, I wear myself out when I'm supposed to be resting, but for me, that is actually restful. Yeah. So I think that's also what maybe something that we wrestle with is sometimes things that look like work are actually restful, and things that maybe look like rest are actually harder work. Yeah. So if that's true, how do we trust God and relax and rest and cease in God's presence when actually work and rest might actually be kind of mixed, right?
Yeah,
So what would you say about that?
You're right, and I think this is common for people in church work and people in other industries where primarily the mind is the part of our body,
Yeah.
our self that is employed when we work. People love like gardening. They love to get out and exercise. People go on long hikes on their rest day, and they feel like their tank is full. I think the thing that we need to monitor is, are we delighting? And not that you don't delight when you work. I mean, people whistle while they work all the time. And some people get very lucky, and the thing that they really love, they get to do for a job.
Yeah.
And they're not trying to like fool anybody by it. Like they really do. It's authentic. But I do think that if running is something that you can delight in, for us, like, I mean, this is the season where like the kids and I go to the ice rink on Fridays to play a little bit. I get to go Saturday morning. Then I get to play Sunday night in men's league.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool. Like I kind of feel like anytime I'm putting out hockey gear, it's Sabbath time for me.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way. Like I feel it's different. I'm in a different space. I kind of feel like a different person, like more or less when I'm out there playing and stuff. And then when it's done, I get to zip the bag up. I get to drive home. I'm like, okay, now now the task list can be brought back. And I feel like I'm rested and I've delighted. And so I really enjoy. Yeah. And so I think for people, find the thing that, once again, it's different than your work, that helps you, kind of fill the delight bucket in your life.
Yeah.
And do that for, a day, 24 hours, 36 hours. And then say, okay, I get to put that aside. And I don't feel bad that I didn't get to work on that, or that I didn't get to experience that. I did.
Yeah.
So now I get to go back to work and not have that, like this gnawing sense that I haven't been able to do nothing but work recently. So I just think you notify those things, because it will be different for everybody. And the last thing that we should put is a legalism, some binding things like, no, you must not watch TV. No, you must not do X, Y, and Z. But what if that really allows someone to kind of get back to ground zero? I think that we allow them to employ that in order to get there.
Yeah, no, that's good. Maybe one more kind of theological, philosophical question we can start to wrap up. But I can't remember where I heard this. Maybe you'll know. But I think there's some train of thought, maybe like a Christian leader, who had kind of the idea that Sabbath is kind of a state of mind more than like an actual 24-hour period or whatever. So again, I can't remember where I picked this up, somewhere along the way. That like this person or this train of thought says it doesn't really matter how many hours or how many days you cease. It's more of a kind of a trust in God mindset. And so I think what the gist of what they were saying was, whether you work 7 days a week or only 3 doesn't really matter very much, as long as your mindset is that you're trusting God to provide, and you're taking time to have some quiet time, stay active in a church community. As long as you have that mindset, whether you're working 7 days or none,
right,
the mindset is the most important. Is that possible, or do you think having some actual boundaries is what we actually need?
I mean, I don't know anything. That seems like a thinly veiled justification to be a workaholic, right?
But, or overly lazy. Like I think there's that part of it too.
Yeah,
we can overuse this too, I think.
No, yeah. I do think a period of time, and this is something that one of my first professors, she said 36 hours is what she likes.
Okay.
So like the evening of the day before and like a full day.
Yeah.
And then you go to bed on that second day toward that end of 36 hours. Then you can wake up running. Like you can wake up, okay. Like almost like you're bored of not, doing your tasks.
Yeah, right.
Like that would be probably the best thing. James Bryan Smith, in his book, The Good and Beautiful God, one of the first practices he gives is sleep. And he says, try to get 7 hours sleep, 3 days. He's like, we're a sleep deprived culture. So let's be realistic. If you can get 3 nights, if you can get 7 hours, that's a good start. Yeah. He's like, or try to pick one day where you just stay in bed until you're bored. Like you're like stayed in bed long enough, you're like, man, you don't feel like guilty, like, like the super ego is judging me for being American who's in bed, at 10 o'clock in the morning, but like you're just bored. You're like, it really is time to like put on some clothes and get something done, Yeah. And so I do think it's worth this. I think it would be my initial prescription is try to find 24 hours.
Yeah.
And the same 24 hours for like 7 weeks.
Okay.
And just try it. Like have this be like your training wheels. Yeah. And say, well, I've been told to do this. And so you don't feel bad. And you can tell people, hey, I've got to have a day. And I've been told to do so. And then just see. And then maybe you can adjust from there. But I do think having a season where you are different and where work can be paused, I think that's where we get the positive benefit of that resistance of saying, work is not my God.
Yeah.
the money that I earn for one more day of work is not my God.
Yeah.
God is, Adonai, Jesus, he's my God. Like he's the God that I could trust in. All good things come from him, not from my employer, even though I'm glad where I work.
Yeah.
And so I think that we have to have like a real vivid expression of that. And so I think having a day where you don't go to the office or you don't pick up the laptop that the office gave you,
right,
to do your work, I think that does something in us that's that we can't simulate any other way.
I think it's kind of interesting, kind of counterintuitive that one of the 10 Commandments is Sabbath, rest, and there's so many rules in the Old Testament. There's something deep within us that does not want to do this. Mm-hmm. We're like wired to keep going, like to power through, to be busy, to produce and consume and keep earning and keep working. So there's so many things that are just, I think, innate in us against this. So it is incredibly counterintuitive, countercultural to stop and rest. And I don't know what that is within us. I don't know why God wired us the way that, I guess, to depend on him, I suppose. But I think it's just interesting. There's a lot of rules about this because we need them, or else left to our own devices, we probably work ourselves to death.
People would be cutting corners, man. And they did. And that's why I think we have all these kind of silly things. But it came from a sacred place of saying, no, we really like this will damage our society if we don't all do this together. I think that's maybe a critical piece of this too, is because if you rest when your friends don't rest, you feel like you're missing out on community too. Yeah. So like, what if you could carve like a community where you're like, hey, we're going to do this together. And that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get together all the time, because that could be a lot of work, particularly if you have young kids hauling the diaper bang, all this stuff, right? Yeah. But if you could say, as a small community, we're going to make Saturday our rest day. We'll keep up with each other. Yeah. And every now and again, we will get together. Dads do this thing, moms do this thing, and the other will watch the kids or whatever. I think that could be a cool thing. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's all. Can we get all of our intention to stand against this urge inside not to do this? Because it really is. Step one is resistance, resisting the urge to be a person who only works. We will not be delightful people if we do that. Yeah. I think that's the message from the wisdom tradition. And we want to be delightful people because it bears witness to our God who delights in us. And also it just helps engender community. Yeah. And I think it helps create the better families that hopefully, South Korea is hoping that this gambit does. Yeah. I think it'll be for us too. It would be devastating if at the end of life, my kids are like, "Man, Dad, you worked too much. Like you missed out a lot." Like that would hurt, man. And I hope that that's not the experience that I have with them. So.
And I think it's just interesting. This is yet another thing where I think, Christian or not, the people in South Korea, whether they follow Jesus or not, this is just a good way to live. Having rhythms of work and rest is good, even if you don't believe in God. But of course, if you do, it's part of what He's instructed us to do.
Yeah. So. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's good, man. Thank you for your insight on that.
Well, thanks for the topic. Helpful. It's good, and we had to call each other out on it. Like, did you get some rest this week?
Yeah, because I'm guilty of this, man. It's hard.
Well, I don't want to make you feel more good, but
no.
But I do think that we need to goad each other toward this path.
Yes.
So
agreed. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll wrap it up there. So thanks again so much to all our friends watching or listening. Again, let us know if there's anything you want us to tackle next week, but we'll plan to be here next week. So have a good weekend, and go Jayhawks, I guess. I'm a little scared about Arkansas. We'll see how that goes.
It is going to be an interesting first round for them, but yeah, it'll be fun.
Okay, enjoy some basketball. I'll see you guys.
All right, see you next time.